Okay, Minister, the Commission investigation was set up in 2015 into the 14 mother and baby homes, even that term homes just sticks in my throat, and 4 county homes, was due last February. It was extended on the basis of the workload involved in investigating these institutions. The interim report last year stated the issues of living conditions, mortality rates, post-mortem practice, vaccine trials and practices in relation to placement for fostering and adoption. The interim report stated some of these investigations were very time-consuming, and the government extended the investigation until February this year. That had a devastating effect on the survivors, devastating effect. I think it was Paul Redmond, chairperson of the Coalition of Mother and Baby Home Survivors, said the survivor community is elderly and dying, and many hundreds have already passed away since the Tuam 800 story broke in May 2014. And he was scathing of the delay. Then a bomb dropped last week that the Commission has requested a further year before publishing a final report. Correct me if I'm wrong. The information I have is that the report was finalised in early December last. It had gone to the AG, pending it being sent to you, Minister, and the Cabinet, and I've also been informed that more files from the HSE have emerged, and this is why potentially the Commission is seeking a delay. The survivors have been anxiously waiting for this report, Minister, and you know that, and have been physically and emotionally shattered by the news announced in the newspaper last week. It was a cold and calculated way to inform survivors and their families this way. Some survivors in their 70s and 80s were outside the Dáil gates yesterday. They were cold and they were angry. It was a disgraceful way to treat these ageing people. Their rights, their justice is being denied. Will you, Minister, please explain exactly what is happening and why there is no early warning that these people are, why there's no early warning of this proposed delay? These people are losing confidence of you, your government and the Commission.
Clare Daly.
Minister, I think it's fair to say that the request for a second extension from the Commission is really the last straw for many of us here, and certainly for many of the survivors as well. I think that request should be refused. I'm very curious to hear what your attitude is, what level of warning you were given by the Commission that this bombshell was going to drop a year almost after the last extension request, which many felt was a step too far even then. Here we are a year on, and I find it jaw-dropping that we have a scenario where after 4 years we've had 3 interim reports comprising of less than 40 pages between them, 2 of those interim reports looking for more time, and the other interim report really talking about some processes. No details, no findings. What in God's name is going on in this gathering? Because it is correct, as Deputy Collins said, that the manner in which this has been done, if you were a suspicious person, you'd be thinking, is this being done so that the community dies off? The fact that they had to hear it the way they heard it through a newspaper leak caused more insult to them. I mean, the process is as important in many ways as the outcome. And the process here has been an abysmal failure, which has re-traumatised many of the people who were already traumatised. So I'm not actually necessarily blaming you at all until we hear what you say in some ways, because I assume you got this information as well. I think it's very important that you tell us when you got it. Was this flagged? If it wasn't flagged to you, why did they wait till the 11th hour? And if it was flagged and everybody knew about it, why wasn't it done like this? This is devastating, and we really need some clarity. But my attitude is the request should be refused. It's too much.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Connolly.
Minister, I make a simple question. Have they asked for an extension of time, the Commission of Investigation into 14 mother and baby homes and 4 county homes? If so, when did they make that request? How did they make it? How long do you know? And I ask that in the knowledge that back in July 2014, 4.5 years ago, the Minister at that time, O'Reilly, made an announcement that Yvonne Murphy would chair the Commission. The terms of reference were subsequently set in February 15, and here we are almost 4 years later. There have been 3 interim reports. The first one asking to change the time in relation to the publication of the 2 reports, the Confidential Committee report and the Social History report. From day one, there was confusion and delay. And then the 3rd report asking for 1 extension of time, which caused real upset at the time, but people accepted on the assurance given that that report would be published in February of this year. Now remember that this commission has come about on the backs of those who attended mother and baby homes, and particularly Tuam, which gave rise to this commission, where almost 800, the remains of 800 babies and infants were found. And it was through the struggle of those people on the ground who were outside yesterday that forced us into action. None of this was proactive from the government. This was all reactive. And then we find out this year in the paper, Patsy McGarry's report. And interestingly enough, your website then confirmed that there was no, the Minister's own website on January 19, reports, this month, reports in the media did not come from this department, and the speculation contained in these reports is inaccurate. What specific inaccuracies are there? Have they asked for an extension? If so, when? Why? And I'll await your answer before I give my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Antara.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank the deputies, my independent colleagues, for raising the matter of the 4th interim report of the Commission of Investigation into Mother and Baby Homes and certain related matters, which deals with the questions being asked today. The Commission was established to investigate into the conditions in the mother and baby homes and county homes in the period between 1922 and 1998. The scope of the investigation is broad, and at the outset, the time frame was acknowledged as ambitious. I received the 4th interim report in December of 2018, and I met with the chair of the Commission, Judge Yvonne Murphy, last week to discuss the request for the extension of the time frame to deliver their reports and to ensure that I had a full understanding of progress to date and the basis for the additional time being requested. I know how important it is that the Commission completes this sensitive and complex work as soon as possible. It is also important not to underestimate their task. Following our meeting, I am confident that the Commission is using its best endeavors to conclude the investigation as expeditiously as possible, and that there can be no shortcut to finding the truth. The interim report is short. It is not a proposal as suggested by the deputies, but rather it grounds the request for an extension of the time frame to deliver the 3 reports from the Commission by 1 year. The request constitutes a change in the terms of reference of the Commission, and as such, it is a matter for government to consider this request in reflection of their statutory provisions. Government approval is also required to publish the report. And with this in mind, I intend to bring a memo to Cabinet. I have already circulated a draft of the memo to government departments, and I hope to have it on the agenda next week for discussion. It would not be helpful to speculate at this stage on what the government will decide ahead of the Cabinet meeting. I am conscious that the commentary in the media last week on this issue has caused distress and anxiety for those involved in this process. The coverage was misleading and did not originate from my department, as one of the deputies has already referred to. I want to reiterate my commitment here today to stakeholders to use existing channels to inform them of any developments in this area in advance of a public notice, and that I intend to make a public announcement following the Cabinet meeting and clarify the situation for them. Deputies may wish to note that the collaborative forum established last summer has produced an initial report which outline the legislative issues and supports which survivors of these institutions would like the government to prioritise. And I intend to bring this report to Cabinet shortly. The process to deliver on the government decision relating to the mother and baby home in Tuam, County Galway, is also underway. This is being progressed separately to the investigation by the Commission. Once again, I want to thank deputies for their contributions today. I will engage with stakeholders ahead of any public announcements, and I hope to announce the details of the interim report as soon as possible.
Thank you, Minister. And I now call on the deputies in the same order. Once again, Deputies Joan, Clare Daly and Katherine Connolly. They have 1 minute each.
Thanks, Minister, for that reply, but it didn't answer any of our questions in any way fully. You said here that Judge Yvonne Murphy last week you met to discuss the request for the extension of the time frame to deliver their reports and to ensure I had full understanding of progress to date and the basis for the additional time being requested. When did they request it? Did they request that to you in the beginning of December? And if that's the case, why wasn't there some sort of early warning to the survivors in relation to this, and then they read it in the papers? The interim report, it is not a proposal suggested by the deputies, but rather it grounds the request for an extension of the time frame to deliver 3 reports from the Commission by 1 year. Why? Why, Minister? Is that the case? I'm just going to make one point maybe you can take on board. The Commission should produce, before the promised mid-February publication date, a further interim report to deal specifically and solely with redress matters. That should be brought to us before mid-February, an interim report to deal specifically and solely with redress matters, and this will enable the Government to act to address these issues. It's to bring a report at this stage and at least deal with the redress matters.
Thank you, Deputy. Clare Daly.
I think the point is, Minister, that the essence of what was in the papers is correct, that the final report, which was due in February, a year later than had originally been intended, will not now be published. That's what we're hearing, and I appreciate that that's the information which the Commission have given you. It's not your fault, you've been left dealing with it, but I do think you need to step into this now and call it to account, if you like. A report still must be published in February, outlining exactly what has gone on and what is going on. Because if workload is an issue, and I'd imagine it is a very complex area, why was this not flagged prior to now, knowing the people who are victims of this have already been victimised and we're going to be upset at any further delay? The website of the Commission has none of this information on it. People have been left in this limbo for the last couple of weeks wondering what's going on. All of that is fueling a very bad situation. I think there needs to be an itemised list of what still needs to be done, a timetable of when the work will be done, and transparent monthly progress reports. We cannot wait another year and have another year's request on. It's utterly devastating for people, and I think it's a huge challenge as to how this will be handled from now on, but it is very much putting a huge burden of work back on your door that you have to now run with, I think.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Katherine Connolly.
Michael, Minister, I'm afraid I'm not so sympathetic, really, and I'm holding you to account. This is not an acceptable answer. When and how were you approached by the Commission in relation to an extension? Why aren't the grounds set out here, and why don't we have a copy of that report? The lines are being blurred here into who's responsible for what. A commission of inquiry was set up independently. It is a duty to report in a way that we can see and read and look at. It is not acceptable that you are not telling us where that report is, why we don't have it, and what are the grounds for it. It's ridiculous and utterly unacceptable to be here telling us there's grounds and we don't know what they are when they were set out. It led to a meeting last week. If there's a shortage of staff has been mentioned, we should know that. If there's a reason why the work can't be completed in time, we should know that in an open and accountable manner. That's the least that we deserve in this stall, so we can represent the people outside who have greatly suffered. And you know well that I've attended quite a lot of the meetings, and the anger on the ground is palpable. And from day one there was an absence of trust, and I went out on a limb to give the system a chance. And looking back on that, it was rather foolish, because 2015 to 19, we've got nothing but delay, obfuscation, and a blurring of boundaries. Now, at the very least, tell us precisely when the request came, how it came, publish the report you have, whatever the nature of that report is. Thank you.
On Tara.
Okay, thank you, deputies. First of all, I think your questions, most of you are asking when did the request come in. It came in December. The request came in December. It is an interim report. The procedures whereby in terms of the establishment of the independent commission, and the commission has requested an extension for their work. That has to be presented to government. Government has to agree or not agree to that, and on the basis of that, then once that has happened, the publishing of the report. So that is the process. Those are the procedures, and that is why. And I am intending to do that at the next cabinet meeting. And when I have done that, and when I provide my cabinet members with the rationale, and in addition to my discussions with Judge Murphy, which I saw as soon as I could, subsequent to the presentation of that interim report, given Christmas and everything, is that when I explain that and engage with my cabinet colleagues in relation to that, and we make a decision, we will let the survivors and those primary stakeholders know. I will publish a report, and we will publish our decision. And those are the proper procedures. And you will know then what is the rationale in that regard. And I am very happy to come back and to debate and discuss those issues with you. Secondly, as you well know, it is an independent commission. And so in the sense that, yes, so there are certain things I can do and certain things I cannot do. But when they make this request and they've laid out the rationale, I am able to go and talk to them about that, and I have done that, and I've spoken with that to more deeply understand in relation to their rationale. Thirdly, I think, and that's what I tried to, I mentioned in my opening remarks, and I know that you acknowledge that. Because you represent them well. I know that you acknowledge that I am also aware of how awful and difficult this news is for the people to receive. I understand that. I understand that. And I will be able to provide you with rationale in relation to the response in terms of my own response specifically to what they've said next week after I've given that to my cabinet colleagues. What I will say though is, and you know, I think that, and you're aware of this too, is that in my own capacity as minister, we have done some additional things alongside of and parallel to the Commission of Investigation, particularly because of the ways in which both you have represented their interests as well as I have listened to them as too. And the report that I have received from the collaborative forum which we established of people who represent and were actually themselves residents within these institutions, and that's what they're suggesting, that they be called institutions as distinct from homes, have met for a number of months, have put a report together, and that report is with me, which I am considering, and is a very significant report, and we will, and I will bring that to Cabinet, as I said, and we will go through a process of responding to that. That is a parallel in terms of what the Commission of Investigation is doing, in addition to, as you are well aware, the lengthy process that we took by way of responding to what's gone on in terms of the findings in terms of the remains of children in Tuam. So these are the things that are in my domain and what I have responsibility for, and we have acted, and those things are going alongside. I know that doesn't satisfy, and it still doesn't take away from the fact that the extension and the request for that has been a year. But in terms of what I am responsible for and what I can do in terms of a proactive way, I think that we are progressing, and I want to acknowledge this because of the extraordinary advocacy of the survivors and their family themselves, as well as your ability to represent their interests.
Thank you, Minister.